Once upon a time, there were 13 colonies in America. They were part of a big and powerful kingdom. This kingdom was Great Britain. A king lived far across the ocean in a grand palace in London. For many years, the people in the colonies felt like they were British. They spoke the same language, they followed the same laws. They were proud to be part of such a large empire. But slowly, things began to change. The people in America started to feel different. They were building new towns and new lives. They were becoming something new. The people in the colonies worked very hard. They cut down trees to build homes. They planted crops in the rich soil. They built ships to sail the wide ocean. They created a life that was their own, far from the king and his court. They believed in simple ideas. They believed that they should have a say in how they were ruled. They thought that if they paid money to the government, they should have a voice in that government. This was a very important idea to them. It was an idea that grew stronger and stronger with each passing year, like a small seed growing into a mighty tree. Life in America was different from life in England. The land was vast and open. There was a sense of freedom in the air. People could move and build and dream in ways that were not possible in the old country. This feeling of freedom became very precious. They read books and talked in coffee houses about big ideas like liberty and rights. The king in London was named George III. He was a powerful ruler. He believed he had the right to rule the colonies in any way he saw fit. He did not understand the new ideas growing in America. He thought the colonists should be grateful. Britain had a strong army. Britain had a strong navy. Both protected the colonies. The king felt the colonies should help pay for this protection. He and his government, Parliament, decided to make the colonies pay new taxes. They thought this was a simple and fair fix to money problems. These new taxes were not popular in America. There was a tax on sugar. There was a tax on paper, the Stamp Act. People had to buy special stamps for newspapers. People had to buy special stamps for letters. People had to buy special stamps for documents. The colonists were very angry. It wasn't just the money, it was the idea. They had no one in Parliament to speak for them. They had no voice. No taxation without representation, shouted. This became their rallying cry about fairness and freedom. King George III did not listen. He thought the colonists were just difficult children. He sent more soldiers to enforce the laws. This only made things worse. Red-coated soldiers marching in towns, colonists felt occupied, not protected. One of the most famous taxes was the tax on tea. Tea was a very popular drink in the colonies. Almost everyone drank it every day. The king and his government decided to pass a law called the Tea Act. This law made British tea cheaper, but it still had the tax. The government thought this would trick the colonists into buying the tea and paying the tax. They thought the colonists would choose cheap tea over their principles. But they were wrong. The colonists were not just worried about money, they were worried about their rights. In the busy port city of Boston, people were furious. They saw the ships arriving in the harbor filled with the king's tea. They refused to let the ships unload their cargo. For weeks the ships sat in the harbor, a symbol of the king's unfair rule. The people of Boston held meetings. They talked and argued about what to do. A brave leader named Samuel Adams spoke to the crowds. He filled them with a spirit of defiance. They would not give in. They would not pay the tax. They would make a stand. On a cold night in December of 1773, something dramatic happened. A group of men, members of a secret group called the Sons of Liberty, decided to take action. They dressed up as Native Americans. This was a disguise to hide who they were. They were quiet and determined. They marched down to the harbor where the tea ships were docked. The moon was bright on the water. The men climbed aboard the ships. They opened the heavy wooden chests filled with tea and threw them into the water. They dumped 342 chests of tea into Boston Harbor. The Boston Tea Party made King George III very, very angry. He saw it as a crime and a direct attack on his authority. He decided to punish Boston. He closed the city's busy port, which meant no ships could come in or out. This hurt the city badly. People lost their jobs. Food became scarce. The king also sent more soldiers and took away many of the local government's powers. These new harsh laws were called the Intolerable Acts because the colonists found them impossible to tolerate. But the king's plan did not work. Instead of crushing the rebellion, the Intolerable Acts brought the 13 colonies closer together. The other colonies felt sorry for Boston. They sent food and supplies to help the people. So they sent representatives from each colony to a meeting in Philadelphia. This meeting was called the First Continental Congress. It was the first time the colonies truly came together as one. At the next meeting, the Second Continental Congress, the talk grew more serious. The fighting had already started. Brave men had fought British soldiers at Lexington and Concord. Now, the leaders had a big decision to make. Should they try to make peace with the king, or should they declare themselves completely free? A quiet, thoughtful man from Virginia named Thomas Jefferson was chosen to write down their ideas. He was a brilliant writer. He spent many days writing, choosing each word very carefully. He wanted to explain to the world why America deserved to be free. On July 4, 1776, the Congress voted to approve Jefferson's document. It was called the Declaration of Independence. It was a beautiful and powerful piece of writing. It said that all people are created equal. It said that people have rights that no king or government can take away. To fight a war, the new country needed an army, and an army needed a leader. The Continental Congress chose a tall, serious man from Virginia to be the commander-in-chief. His name was George Washington. He was not a man who loved war, actually. He was a farmer who loved his home, Mount Vernon, but he loved his country more. He knew that the fight for freedom would be long and, honestly, very difficult. He accepted the job with great humility, knowing the huge challenge that lay ahead of him. The new American army, called the Continental Army, was not like the British Army. The British soldiers were professionals. They were well-trained, well-fed, had the best guns, bright red uniforms. They were a fearsome sight on the battlefield. The American army, on the other hand, was made up of ordinary people. They were farmers, blacksmiths, shopkeepers. They did not have proper uniforms, and honestly, many did not even have shoes. Their guns were old. They were not trained soldiers. But they had something the British Army did not have. They were fighting for their homes, their families, and their freedom. Washington's job was incredibly hard. He had to turn this group of brave but disorganized men into an army. The winter of 1776 was a dark time for the American cause. General Washington and his tired, hungry army had been retreating for months. They had been pushed out of New York across New Jersey. The British were close behind. Many of Washington's soldiers were leaving. Their time was up. They wanted to go home to their families. The army was getting smaller every day. Hope was running out. It seemed like the revolution was about to fail. Washington knew he had to do something bold to give his men and his country a reason to believe again. On a freezing Christmas night, Washington planned a surprise attack. He decided to cross the icy Delaware River and attack a group of Hessian soldiers in Trenton, New Jersey. The Hessians were German soldiers hired by the British to fight. They did not expect an attack in the middle of winter, especially not on Christmas. The weather was terrible. It was snowing, sleeting. The river was filled with chunks of ice. It seemed like an impossible journey, but Washington was determined. He gathered his men on the riverbank and prepared for the dangerous crossing. The crossing was a struggle. As the sun rose the next morning, they surprised the Hessians completely. The battle was short. The Americans captured almost 1,000 soldiers. It was a small battle, but it was a huge victory for American morale. The American colonies knew they could not win the war against Great Britain all by themselves. The British Empire was just too big and too powerful. They needed help. They needed a strong ally. Their best hope was France. France was a longtime enemy of Britain. They had fought many wars against each other. The French king, Louis XVI, was eager for a chance to weaken his rival. But he was also careful. He did not want to support a losing cause. The American leaders sent a very wise and famous man to Paris to ask for help. His name was Benjamin Franklin. He was already well known in Europe as a scientist and writer. When he arrived in Paris, he became a celebrity. The French people loved him. He was charming and witty. The big moment came after a major American victory at the Battle of Saratoga in 1777. In this battle, an entire British army was forced to surrender to the American forces. This was a huge turning point in the war. The victory at Saratoga proved to the French and to the rest of Europe that the Americans were a serious fighting force. It showed that they could actually win the war. Benjamin Franklin used this news perfectly. Finally, in 1778, France officially signed a treaty with the United States. They recognized America as an independent nation. They promised to send money. They promised to send weapons. They promised to send ships. The final decisive chapter of the war took place in the South in a small Virginia port town called Yorktown. The main British army in the South was led by a general named Lord Cornwallis. He had been chasing the American forces through the Carolinas. In 1781, he made a fateful decision. He marched his army to Yorktown, which was on a peninsula. He planned to use the port to get supplies and reinforcements from the British Navy. He felt safe there with the river behind him. with the powerful British fleet controlling the sea. But George Washington saw an opportunity. He was in the north with the main American army, and a large French army led by General Rochambeau. They came up with a brilliant and daring plan. They would secretly march their combined armies more than 400 miles south to Virginia. At the same time, the French Navy under Admiral de Grasse sailed up from the West Indies and blocked the entrance to the Chesapeake Bay. This would trap Cornwallis. The plan worked perfectly. He was surrounded on land by the combined American and French armies and blocked from the sea by the French Navy. For weeks, American and French cannons bombarded the British positions day and night. Finally, on October 19, 1781, Lord Cornwallis surrendered his entire army. As the British soldiers marched out to lay down their weapons, a band is said to have played a tune called "The World Turned Upside Down." It was a fitting song. A small group of colonies had defeated the mightiest empire on earth.